For the second episode of April, we're gonna cut apart the daddest of the dad shoes, the Yeezy 700s, because I wanna know if these are all hype or if they're actually a pretty decent shoe like most dad shoes should be. And we're gonna find that out by cutting them in half, peeling it like an onion, burning a lot of stuff, mostly for fun, but also to test the quality of leather. And because you just can't trust sneakerhead hype, and you especially cannot trust these big brands to tell you the truth about what's inside of their sneakers. So first, is this upper made of several different layers, or does each layer stop where the next layer begins? We're gonna figure out with my trusty knife. This first layer, this little black layer, if we peek underneath there, the mesh layers do continue underneath of this leather. What about this underneath this 3M? So this gray layer of leather that has a little bit of a grain pattern on it, it does stop after that black strip begins. And then the final panel I want to check is maybe the most important one, which is this toe panel of that gray suede. Let's pop a couple of these stitches. Hopefully you can't hear Toaster's licking on the video because he licks loud. Okay, so underneath this black layer of leather does stop. Oh, and then one thing I really want to check, there's a little hidden thing of the 3 Adidas stripes and 3M tape underneath of this, and I'm just curious kind of what it looks like. So let's get this a little more dissected. So that's the kind of, I love that little hidden feature of the reflective 3M stripes of the Adidas sign. Ooh, right there. It's kind of cool to see. And another thing I want to check is if these panels of leather continue all the way underneath of the insole like a higher quality sneaker would, or do these panels stop immediately at this midsole? So I'm just gonna take my knife and try to splay that open just a little bit. And that leather does continue all the way down into the midsole, which is really good to see. And now that we've got this thing peeled apart like an onion, let's see if these panels are real leather. And the easiest way to do that, and probably the least realistic way, is just burning them to see what smell comes off of it. If it smells like burning hair, and smells like burning flesh, it's probably burning flesh, which this panel around the toe definitely is leather. And a more realistic way of checking to see if a panel is leather is if you look really, really closely at the cross section. If you see little fabric fibers in there, it's usually fake leather, or if you see foam in there, it's usually fake leather. But once you identify that it is real leather, it's a little bit more tricky to figure out what quality of leather, because generally there's a cross section, I'll do it over here because Toast is in the way, a cross section of leather. The higher up you are in that cross section, the more grain pattern you're gonna have in your leather. The lower down you are in that cross section, the more just loose fibers it is. And that top grain pattern is that highly sought after smooth leather look that's significantly more expensive than that suede leather. And it also gives leather a lot of its strength, because it's kind of like if you've ever pulled back carpet, those loose top fibers that you see in carpet are held together by a layer of glue underneath. Well, that top grain pattern is basically the top flesh that holds all those loose fibers together. And on a really high quality suede, what they've done is they've taken that grain pattern and flipped it upside down, so that more fibrous bit is up, and then the grain pattern that gives it all its strength is hidden underneath. So when you look at these panels, you can see here that it's basically suede on both sides, telling us that it's in the suede section, a lower quality and an inferior leather. And a lot of times they split suede leather so thin that they have to back it with a fabric or some other type of backing. On this leather, they've backed it with some sort of like plastic glue almost. Let's just do another burn test to see if we can smell what's going on here. So it didn't really react a ton to the flame. So I think it's just a light layer of glue that helps keep those fibers together. So for a $300 shoe, you would hope that this would be a higher quality leather, but this is just a suede leather, which is kind of a bummer. For 300 bucks, you'd hope that they'd use a good quality leather. And then if we check the other panels of this leather, so this black layer is also suede. Gray layer on the back is basically the same leather as around the toe. And this smooth gray leather, this is actually a pretty decent piece of leather, because you can see it's got those little teeny pores in there, which can be tricky. And a lot of people will fake a nice grain leather by basically taking a suede, putting a heavy plastic finish on top, and embossing fake pores into it. So if you're ever curious if it's real leather and these are real pores, all you have to do is stretch and almost like scratch this leather. And if you see those pores opening and moving and not just disappearing as you stretch it, that means it's a real grain pattern in there, and those are real pores, which means it's a real higher quality leather. So out of all the leather on the shoe, this smooth gray leather is the highest quality leather. And I think the reason behind doing it that way is because the laces go through that. So you want a higher quality leather so that these don't just pull through a cheap suede. But they've cut it so thin, and they split it so thin that they've had to back it with a fabric backing. So it kind of negates the whole purpose of having a higher quality for your laces to go through. So ultimately it's a design inspired by high quality construction that's not really high quality. And then before we cut this thing in half to see how much boost is in there and how it's all structured, let's burn some of these materials, mostly just for fun, and it looks really cool, but also it gives us some information on what these materials are made of, and it's just interesting to see how they react to open flame. So let's start with this little gray mesh first, and that stuff just curls up and starts spitting and smoking. So that's a super synthetic material. Next, let's do this little blue panel. And actually, now that I'm looking at this, I thought this green panel and this blue panel were two different panels that were joined underneath the suede, but it's actually one single piece of this material, and it's just dyed differently. That's super interesting because I thought for sure it'd be more economical to do different fabrics dyed in different ways and just cut them and sew them together rather than having these specially dyed in certain portions. That's really weird. So this whole vamp panel of mesh is one single piece. It's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different panels. It's all just one panel of mesh. Next, let's burn this 3M material, and I'll put some B-roll obviously over top of it reflecting as it burns so we can get kind of a cool shot of this. So it mostly just bubbles up and starts fizzling. Oh, and it gets super pliable with heat. Whoa. It like melts but still maintains its shape and becomes super stretchy and elastic. I'm probably gonna get cancer one day from all these fumes, so subscribe, help me. And if you didn't know, I used to be a wildland firefighter, and all the wildland boots are made of leather. And let me show you why and how flame resistant leather is compared to synthetic materials. Like if I burn this suede, so I can keep this flame on there for a pretty good time before it even starts burning it. And those little fibers burn first, but the actual leather itself doesn't start on fire, it doesn't burn, it will dry itself out and get cracking, or cracked, it will get cracked? It'll get cracked. And obviously flame resistance in sneakers is not that big of a deal, but it is an important material for sneakers, and I love material science and testing, and I think this stuff's super interesting. So now that you know a little bit more about leather quality and how to test it in mostly useless ways for real world applications, let's get this thing cut apart and see what's on the inside. Okay, we got it chopped in half, and I love cutting sneakers. They're so much easier. And every single video I do, people always ask me, why don't I just cut the whole thing on the bandsaw instead of cutting with the knife on the upper and then the bandsaw? Well, the problem with the bandsaw is it'll grab an upper and suck it into there, and it could potentially grab my fingers or hand or pull it in. It's just a lot safer to cut the upper with the knife and then use the bandsaw so it doesn't get bound up on the bandsaw. So there's the answer. But let's see what's inside. In all the videos I watched for the research of this video, people kept talking about the quantity of boost in these shoes, and I have no idea what they're basing it off of, but at least now we know. So if you look at the amount of boost in this 700 compared to the 350, it still has a lot of boost in it, but not nearly as much as the 350s. And another question I kept seeing was, is there boost underneath the toe, and how far does that boost go? It kind of stops at a really odd spot. It stops right where your toes would be sitting. I feel like that would lead to some discomfort right underneath your toes where it's a lot harder. And speaking of squishiness, let's see what the durometer of this is, if it's the same. Oh, I think it's actually harder than the 350s. So the 350s, it's around 5 to 7, but the 700s is around 13, 17. That is really interesting. I thought all boost would be about the same hardness, but according to this, the 700s have a harder boost foam than the 350s. So maybe boost squishiness is dependent on how thick it is and how it's applied inside of the shoe. Because this shoe is encapsulated by another foam, which this hardness is like 23, 24. So it's a little bit denser of a foam. So now that we've thoroughly dissected this sneaker and tested its materials, is it a good quality sneaker? I would say that it is. I think obviously there's some materials that could be upgraded, but everything on the inside here is built like it should be built. But is it worth the money? I think the better question is there anything about this shoe that makes it worth the premium cost of $300 compared to most sneakers that are like $150 to $200? I don't see anything in here that justifies that price. It reminds me a lot of how New Balances are built and well, they are dad shoes. So comparing it to that price, I would say these are at least twice the price of what they should be, just because they are Yeezys and because of the hype. And that's just the retail price. We're not even talking about the resale price. So what do I think of these shoes? Well, I think they're pretty ugly, to be honest, but that's almost in a good way. To me, they kind of look like almost like a Rick and Morty shoe or some sort of cartoon shoe, because it looks like this shoe was designed with a broad stroke. You know, there's not tons of little teeny details. Everything's big and exaggerated and almost like it was made to be on a cartoon. So would I wear them? I have a hard time pulling off dad shoes, probably because I look too much like a dad. But these shoes are such an exaggerated version of a dad shoe that I think I would wear them, because people wear real dad shoes, ironically, and this shoe is an ironic design of a dad shoe. So it's almost like a double irony or a double negative. And so for that reason, I think I would wear them, because it's such an obvious dad shoe that no one would be wearing this shoe on accident. So I probably would wear them if I was given a pair, if I didn't cut one of them in half. So let me know what you guys think, and the next April video is going to be the desert boots. So let me know in the comments what you want answered, what you want tested, and what you want to know about those desert boots, because obviously it does help the video. But also I really want to make sure I'm answering what you guys want to know about these shoes. So thank you for watching, and thanks for everything you guys do. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. These shoes are so expensive, and thank you guys. See ya. We filled these 3 chambers with 3 different fillings from different pillows. The first one is the cheap Amazon shredded memory foam. The next one is a feather pillow, and finally the Saybrook pillow. And if we drop a ball on these 3 fillings, you can see the cheap memory foam really doesn't absorb the shock very well, and it just sits on top because of how hard those pieces are, because it's recycled old memory foam. Next to the feather, we drop it and it goes straight to the bottom and almost cracked the glass. And finally the Saybrook, we drop it and it doesn't hit the bottom, but it also doesn't float on top. It's right in that sweet spot of contouring to that without being too flat and also not being too firm. So is it the most scientific test? No, but it visually demonstrates what I like about Saybrook pillows. You know, there's that perfect zone of being able to shape it and contour to your head. So check out Saybrook via the link in my description, and if you want, you can buy one and get one at 20% off by using the code ROSEANVIL at checkout. Thanks again to Saybrook, and thank you guys for watching this video and sticking all the way to the end. See ya.